Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first talk. I'm Chad Toprak. I'm the director of Freeplay, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Freeplay hosts and broadcasts from the stolen lands of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, where stories have been shared and games have been played since time immemorial. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and to anyone watching who has a connection to the world's oldest living culture. Sovereignty was never ceded, and the violence of the colonial project is still ongoing. So welcome to the festival's first official talk. Talk is Indigenizing Games, a yarn between mob and Whānau. Joining us are four fantastic First Nations people, Lisa Blakie, Naphtali Faulkner, Phoebe Watson, and Dakoda Barker. We're really excited to have them on board and looking forward to the yarn. I'll hand it over to the panel to take it from here.
Cool. Kia ora koutou. My name is Lisa. I am going to be the one fielding the questions today and facilitating this conversational kōrero. I would like to actually start by thanking our friend Jay, who brought us all together to do this panel for Freeplay. It's something I hadn't even considered doing, so I feel really lucky to be a part of it today with other developers that I admire so much. So I will start by just introducing myself and then pass it on to our other panelists. So my name is Lisa. I could probably tell by my accent. I'm from New Zealand, Aotearoa. And I am based in Ōtepoti, Dunedin, so that's like the bottom of the South Island. And I am Ngāi Tahu Waitaha Māori, and I whakapapa back to the southernmost marae in Aotearoa, so I think that's why I like living in cold places so much. And I am a narrative designer at Runaway, which is a Dunedin-based mobile games company, and I also am working on a code-funded project, so a government-funded project based in Te Ao Māori about a Toroa or an albatross. And prior to doing game development, I wrote an honours thesis at uni about Indigenous storytelling, primarily around Never Alone, so that was in 2015 when that game had just came out. So always been interested in Indigenous storytelling, and particularly with video games. That's a bit about me. I'd like to pass it on to Phoebe to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, my name's Phoebe. My mum is Bunditjmara from Southwest Victoria, so I grew up in Warrnambool. But currently, right now, I'm based in Melbourne on Kulin Nation country. And yeah, so currently you probably know most of my work and in Innchanted with DragonBear. So I do a lot of consultation with elders, a bit of game design with them, but I'm also working on another project with Star Stable as like a writer and hopefully moving into other assets. So that's a new one I'm really excited about as well.
That's amazing. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so actually, and I'm also working with another team called Guk. So I've kind of in 3 different places at the moment, but I'm doing every single one of them at the moment. So yeah, that's a bit about me, and I'll move over to Dakoda.
G'day, I'm Dakoda. I'm a Gubby Gubby man from the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, but like Phoebe, living in Melbourne now, the Kulin lands. I do a lot of different stuff in games. At the moment, my predominant thing is teaching at RMIT. I'm in the throes of marking at the moment, so it's a little bit rough. So please excuse my bedraggled appearance. But I also do a lot of consultation work and design work of my own. And I'm also working alongside Phoebe on the Star Stable project, which is very exciting. There's some cool stuff going on. I have no idea what can and can't be said. So I'm going to try not to break any NDAs. But yeah, there's a lot of exciting stuff out there. So yeah, I'm really stoked that this is happening. It's not a thing that kind of occurred to me that we could do. And yeah, awesome that it's happening. And before I pass it on, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the plights of Indigenous people and in general people around the world. I know there's a lot of bad stuff happening, particularly at the moment with Palestinians being very unjustly treated. And as you know, we've all had our struggles, and it's only through solidarity that we advance beyond this point. So shout out to everyone out there struggling at the moment, and pass it on to our lucky last panelist.
Thanks, bros. Yeah, so kia ora and g'day. I'm one of those dreaded Aussies, Māori Aussies. I hope is my mic that's loud enough? I hope. Yeah, I'm Ngāi Tarangi, and connections there to like Beasley and Faulkner, Whānau. But yeah, at the moment I'm living on Bundjalung country. Sort of, I know your struggle there because I used to work at a university where I sort of, you know, my boss was Uncle Norm Sheen, Wiradjuri fella. And, you know, I got a chance to also sort of rub shoulders sometimes with Auntie Mary Graham. And she's a, you know, she's really strong writer and critic of neoliberalism. So, you know, I was pretty blessed in that space. But yeah, I made Umurangi Generation, which came out last year, and it came out this weekend. So that's why my hair's like this, because I haven't been sleeping much. It came out on Switch.
You look great. You look great.
But yeah, I'm really excited to have this yarn today, because I think it's this whole thing where, you know, a lot of times when you're in this space, you know, it's good to know you're not alone in terms of talking about stuff and doing it the right way a lot of the time. So yeah, with that, pass on to you, Lisa.
Kia ora. Awesome. Yeah, I think that'll be a strong reoccurring theme with this panel today is solidarity. Especially, I guess I want to talk about that a bit before we get into it, since Australia and New Zealand are so close together, and yet our Indigenous cultures are just completely different. But the thing that we share in common is that solidarity with each other, the people of the land, the tangata whenua. And I think that's what makes us the best storytellers on the planet. That's just my opinion. And I think that's why a lot of us are so drawn to video games as a medium as well. For me personally, that's why I love them so much, because I think they're the best vehicles for storytelling. But I wanted to ask each of the panelists, what drew you to games, and do you think that it had anything to do with you being Indigenous yourself? Let's start with Tale.
Well, I guess going into the games industry, I can say that the reason for that is sort of a reactive one. You know, a lot of times when we start to do a lot of good stuff, someone comes along and tries to smash it all down, don't they? And, you know, that was no different from when sort of we were working at a university. And so, you know, it was about sort of coming out of there and using that skill set to sort of make something that was, you know, something that was true to a lot of this stuff, because, you know, one of the things which I guess was always a bit of a frustration working in spaces like that was the sort of idea that people would say they, you know, want things that are Indigenous, but then when we go and do them, they want us to dial it back or dumb it down. And, you know, there was this thing that elders used to say to us, and it was this idea that, you know, we're often listened to but not heard. And so, you know, the idea with this game was, you know, I got my little settlement package and I was like, okay, I can make I've got a bit of months here to make something. And so I made this game, and the idea was to sort of just put it in that space and not dumb anything down and not have to pull anything back, because, you know, there were no, you know, government funding or anything like that that could touch it. And that way, you know, it came out, I think, as this sort of thing where, you know, there's layers to it. And that's sort of how I sort of started in this game space, because it's only sort of been in the industry for, you know, a year. But, you know, in terms of games, I've been playing them most of my life. And I think, you know, I do share that thing about, like, you know, our stories are usually the best ones, because the way we tell stories is different. You know, there's layers to it. And, I think that's the whole thing about solidarity, is that, all around the world, Indigenous stories are these stories that you can hear when you're a kid and an adult, and there's two meanings to take away from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you learn something new every day from them, I find. What about you, Dakoda?
Yeah, it never actually occurred to me to consider whether my heritage had any part to play, but when you reflect on it momentarily, it's of course that affinity for storytelling was always there and was built up and like cultivated through a long running history and exposure to all sorts of storytelling that had a purpose beyond just entertainment. So I think when I first kind of got into teaching and working in game spaces, it was in a serious games program. So games designed for a purpose beyond just entertainment. And yeah, it occurs to me now that that's probably quite connected, that that sort of exposure to stories that were, entertaining and interesting, but that had lessons and taught us about the land and the history and, were full of knowledge. It seems like every couple of years there's a new story about, these scientists sat down and looked at Indigenous stories in an area and were like, wow, okay, this scientific knowledge predates our kind of consensus by thousands and upon thousands of years. And it's like, if we were kind of given the chance to be taken more seriously throughout history, I think maybe that whole idea of advancement or civilization would be much farther along than it is even today. So that's really interesting to me. But as I say, like one half of my family is Māori and Maori. So I have that sort of influence from both sides of just a weird cultural concoction. And it's fascinating and beautiful, and I wouldn't change it for anything. So it's really good to have that solidarity here as well. Like that exposure to cultures that feel just as familiar and warm to me, even if they're not my own. So that's fantastic. Phoebe, you want to follow up with your perspective?
Yeah, it's funny. I agree. I have a very similar situation to you, Dakoda. It wasn't something that I initially thought about. I thought, I was very influenced by like forensic science. I really wanted to be a forensic scientist. And before that, I wanted to be a zoologist. Like it's got nothing to do with anything that I'm doing now. But now you speak about, telling stories and that affinity for telling stories. I'm having this really weird moment of reflection literally right now. And just like realizing that that's 100%. Like I was very into art as well, and telling stories through art, and I was very interested in English and literature and writing stories. So I dabbled in like a little bit of like Wattpad, nothing too crazy like I know some people get. And ever since I was a kid, I have been lucky enough to be a part of culture through my father. I'm Indigenous on my father's side, and he's the one who taught me everything I know, along with our elders. And ever since I could basically walk, I've been doing cultural dance, and those cultural dances tell stories. So now that I reflect, that's always something that I've been very attuned to, is telling those stories. And when I came into games, it wasn't, my heritage wasn't something that came to mind. In fact, I was, during that moment in my life, it was actually not contested, but I was struggling with identity and being proud of who I was. And it wasn't until I was fully into games and I started working with DragonBear and Innchanted. They hired me to be a cultural consultant and cultural game designer around the Indigenous content. And it wasn't until really working through that game that I realized how important my role was, and B, how proud I was of my culture. And that was a really interesting journey to happen whilst already working in that space. But that's how I came through it.
Yeah, totally. I was pretty similar actually too, now that I'm thinking about it. But I think it's been more recently that I've kind of realized like all of the stuff that gets taught to you and told, like what makes you Indigenous and what makes the culture what it is, it always just bubbles itself back up into everyday life. Like, and I think that's why games are such an awesome tool for it, because like you said, it's not just like the oral storytelling, there's visual storytelling, and through dance, through carving, through painting, through anything. Music. Music.
A whole
It
different
all-
way of thinking, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that's why games are such an awesome driver for that. You mentioned a bit about the stuff that you're working on in Enchanted. I think it was last year. It was either a GCAP or a Freeplay talk about the music and the soundtrack behind that and how that collaboration came together. What other parts of the game do you see the cultural kind of consultation? Is it throughout the entire game? Is it just through design, story? Can you expand on that? Yeah.
It's really kind of been like throughout the process of the 2.5 years I've been working there, we've slowly been integrating it more and more. So the developers really already had a vision and idea for it, but it was something they really wanted to include and showcase was, Australian Indigenous culture. And so when I jumped on board, we were really working in how we could do it and where it would work and making sure that was done appropriately. But it's definitely, like you said, throughout the music, you can see it visually. It's there through like just relationships with like elders and showcasing those kind of importance. It's in like background lore and how like characters will treat like the land and the space around them as well. So as many like areas I could think of that would work appropriately is definitely, it's in there somewhere.
Yeah, totally. Tyler, did you want to talk about how that kind of Indigenous culture is? I mean, it's really obvious in Umurangi. It's in the game, in the name, I should say. But
even then, the whole thing around that is like, the game's called Umurangi Generation, which is like, red sky, like that's kind of how it translates, like the sunset or whatever. But like, even then it was sort of like the sort of thing where, I do remember pitching it to certain publishers and they wanted to change that. And I think sticking to my guns and just saying, nah, let's just keep it like, authentic to who we are, is something that, ended up being the best thing for it because, it's this thing oftentimes, for me, I was thinking about with this is like showing stuff, but also not showing certain things because there's, that risk of like it getting into the wrong hands and things like that. Like, one of the things I think which, the game sort of does so well is that like it's in an urban setting and there's that, the discourse of, like people say urban Māori or whatever, where, and it's about crash tackling that head on and saying, well, actually, we still exist even in like the future. And, with the game like that, it's about, having certain things there, but also saying like, but we also don't just do the sort of, touristy thing. Because oftentimes I think, when our cultures are sort of portrayed in games and media, it's this idea that, we're all still sort of, walking around in grass skirts or whatever that, and that's not to say we don't still do those cultural practices, but it's more this idea that, when people want to have, say, like a Māori character in a game, they immediately throw on, a really badly drawn moko or something like that. And so with this game, it was about, moving outside of there and showing sort of there's more to us than just sort of, the stuff that's stolen and, coming at that sort of from like a position of power in sort of saying like, we're going to just exist. And rather than like, having to sort of like dumb it down or anything like that, like, let's just put it in there. And, but like, I guess the thing I kind of think is just the whole thing of like, when we do put that stuff in, there is like a process we do that, other sort of game developers probably don't, because with us, we kind of have that, layer of things like Phoebe's talking there about, consulting with the elders when putting stuff like that in, for me, it was about like, it takes place, where my iwi's from, and having certain things in there, there's a reason for it. But, it's that whole thing of keeping it so that certain knowledge is just totally off limits, like it's not there. But then, when I get, one of my little cousins plays it and goes, oh, awesome, you put our mountain in there, and that kind of thing where you can sort of see that for more than what it is in the game, And I think it's just one of those things where, a lot of times people sort of see this as a sort of not a strength thing, but I think it is one of the biggest strengths that, our cultures have, is that we have these, protocols and stuff like that we can sort of work with in these spaces and create really awesome works with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree. Dakoda, do you have anything to add to that? I was thinking about your writings around like Necrobarista and stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been kind of same with me, like fairly recent, that I've kind of clocked that I can really embody this cultural identity in the spaces that I occupy. The kind of game spaces weren't explicitly welcoming or kind of interested in Indigenous cultures beyond just as a tourist attraction or some background settings. And so it's been one of those things that I'm kind of really working hard and searching. And when there's a lot of really great Australian developed video games coming out, like really looking at what influences there are and what kind of identity and stuff is being pushed forward. And Necrobarista is a wonderful game. I highly recommend everyone check it out. But it was really startling to me to kind of see the kind of lack of an Indigenous perspective really kind of, it had this idea of like Australia as a very much a kind of a hallmark of those very white, like Ned Kelly's a prominent character. And it's like these things, these mythic kind of concepts, the mythology of white Australia, but none really of Black Australia. And it was quite unexpected. And I think the reason that I cared enough to really dig into it was because that it was a really compelling and exciting game for me. And I would have loved to see, what that kind of scenario looks like re-injected with the culture that is there. It kind of is a victim of, and I kind of talk about in my article. You can find it on player2.net.au. Talk about the fact that it's a victim of this way that Black Australia has been kind of erased. It's not, I'm thinking like even my like primary schooling, it was, Black Australia maybe got a mention in 1 week, and it's like my only like if I was not raised, just doused in culture, what would I know? Nothing, like nothing at all. And so it's not a kind of an active sort of malice that goes into these games that miss the Indigenous perspective. It's very much just a lack of awareness and education around stuff, which is really where I feel that our responsibility and our power is in reversing that and being the agent of change and showing that, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. Like not just in like we should celebrate our culture because it's our culture, but our stuff is great. Like people should take an interest, people should get excited because there's so much wealth and it's not just in the like, this is one of the things I was thinking about all week kind of in preparation of this. It's not just in the like resisting colonial identities and imperialism and stuff, but the little things, the sort of meaningless stuff is so rich and vibrant. Thinking about superstitions and things, and I'm just like, there's so much material to work with as a creator that you would never have considered, because it's coming from a completely different place than the sort of white westernized standard canon of information. And that has me really amped up as a creator. Like I'm so excited to do stuff now because I feel like I've tapped into this whole part of my knowledge and identity that I never was drawing on before, never kind of considered that I could make use of. So that's, been fantastic for me over the past kind of 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like, all of those points you just made really highlights that importance for just like self-determined Indigenous made games. But I also wonder, like, do you think there's a hesitance for allies or non-Indigenous people to even kind of approach thinking about putting Indigenous content in the games because they're not Indigenous themselves? And what kind of steps do you think they can take around that, aside from just, reaching out to one of us. Is there stuff they can do in their everyday to kind of learn that?
Yeah, I mean, get involved with the culture that's local to where you are. Like, you know, there are community groups everywhere that work hard to preserve and empower the culture of those regions. Like, get involved. Like, it's the same thing with networking, just in interpersonal
totally
stuff.
is,
like,
yeah.
don't go out there and sort of like seek to make connections to purely fuel your own ambitions, right? Go and make friends, go and be a part of that. And through that, gain access and understanding that you wouldn't have otherwise. You know, it's very rare that I run into people who are like, no, I don't want to share what's important to me, that I don't want to invite people into my culture. And when they do so, it's only because they've been exploited and you know, not respected. And so, you know, going and approaching people and being like, you know, what can I do to become part of this is key. It's so valuable. And getting over that fear of having to do it right from the start. Like, everything's messy, everything, you know, people make mistakes. It's fine. Like, it's not going to be the end of the world, but the only way that you can make sure that you're doing a good job is by putting in the effort. You know, get a consultant. Don't just kind of like go and have a crack and be like, oh no, I messed up. Like, get a consultant, work with them, and get a consultant that's local. You know, don't make the mistake of being like, oh, I can talk to anybody and get, you know, this idea. Like, there is absolutely kind of a contemporary kind of pan-Aboriginal culture that we have to share because of, you know, colonialism, but every individual mob has their own unique stuff as well. And it's important to remember that and empower that. We don't want to lose that stuff. And so, yeah, it's like, it's just really important to give it a crack and not being afraid, because if you are approaching things earnestly and in good faith, then nobody has a problem. Like, just nobody has a problem.
Yeah.
And usually the people who complain about stuff are not invested parties. It's not mob that are complaining. It's people who have really wild opinions, and we don't need to listen to them anyway.
Yeah, Phoebe or Tali, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I'll let Phoebe go first. Yeah.
Thank you. So I've done like a talk similar to these before. I've done my talks at GCAP and Freeplay, and I have actually had people approach me saying like, oh, this has been really good insight. You know, I have wanted to include culture and Aboriginal culture. I'm not Indigenous, but I'm kind of scared to go about it. So there is definitely a hesitancy, and I can understand that hesitancy as well. It can be quite scary entering into this space. And I think, yeah, Dakoda's definitely touched on some really important things. Obviously, you need to have like mob involved throughout the entire process. But these processes, like, there is not a clear-cut way that we can tell you, like, step 1, go speak to this person from this organization. Step 2, like, we're still working out these processes. I'm sure that we're still figuring out the right way to make sure everything's culturally safe and sensitive. And like Dakoda said, like, mistakes will probably be made, and I think we need to get over that fear. And the most important thing to remember there is that accountability and owning up to saying, okay, we didn't quite hit the mark on this one, but we're going to work really hard to fix this mistake. And I think, you know, Indigenous people will be very, very happy to see that as well. And like Dakoda said, it's those relationships are very important to Indigenous people. That connection is very important. So yeah, doing it as a business transaction, you're not going to get that in-depth knowledge that you want, that will really make your game stand out. And that's something that's like really tied in just throughout our culture. Like, elders, like, meet these people in person, make an effort to go and see them. Like, if you're including culture, like an Indigenous culture in your games based on other side of Australia, like, I would highly recommend flying over there, given the world circumstances, obviously. But yeah, really showing that you're making an effort is super, super important.
I was just going to say one thing that I think this conversation really reminds me of is just sort of that thing where, you know, sometimes we see that kind of thing where a lot of, I guess, wider Australia tends to think that, you know, the real Aboriginal people live in the Northern Territory, and I just like to say they don't. They're all around the place because, like, you know, every single like what couple hundred k's down the coast, you're going through a different part of the country, and like I think it's just one of these things where the richness is still there, but a lot of the times it's also hidden due to the fact that like there has been this violence in the past. And so if you are a game developer thinking about doing something with your local mob, I just say step carefully around that, because like it is a really sensitive thing a lot of times. And if someone tells you they don't want to go there, just take their word on it. They're also looking out for you in that case, you know. That's all I'd say about that. And, you know, that's the same with, you know, our iwi as well, you know. There are certain stories and, you know, things like that where, you know, they have been misused in the past. And, you know, like I'm pretty sure everyone knows about bad tribal designs because we all lived through the 2000s. And we can see how that's, you know, this kind of thing. And I think one of the things I think about that, you know, showing respect around this stuff is that it is there also to sort of protect you at the end, because, you know, if you're going to people who have had stuff taken from them and been abused in the past, they're actually kind of aware of that by now. And we can actually feed you bullshit information and make you look dumb if we can tell you're just here to sort of make your PhD and things like that. So, yeah, I would just say go slow and be respectful around that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. There's a couple of words in Te Reo Māori that kind of encompass that, which is like whanaungatanga, which is like getting to know the people that you're working with, where they're from, what they do, who their family is, and manaakitanga, which is like looking after each other and taking as much as you're giving back, essentially, which is just how we should live our lives, I reckon.
Great.
Yeah. I was curious to know, maybe outside of your own projects, because that might be cheating, or maybe you're even not allowed to talk about them, if there are any Indigenous-made games out there that are exciting you or inspiring you, or putting you in a position that makes you think, oh, I really want to do that, or I just can't wait for it to come out.
Oh, there's a scam by this Lisa Blakie and yeah, I think you know, there's a really great Discord group, you know, which I'm pretty sure you guys are all part of as well, which is the Indigenous Game Devs Discord group. And, you know, it's really awesome to see all the stuff coming through there and how, you know, people are making stuff that's really good with that. I think one that is sort of like kind of similar to Umurangi Generation, I haven't had a chance to play it yet, but I've had a chance to chat with the dev and sort of see what it's kind of about, is a game called Neofeud, which is sort of like,
I was going to bring it up.
No, I got to it before.
Yeah, all good, all good.
But basically what that is it's kind of like a sort of like a point and click detective game, but it's really about sort of what the fuck's going on in Hawaii at the moment with the colonization that continues to happen there today. You know, and to say that is that the colonization going there today is mainly funded by billionaires who run all these so-called progressive, you know, tech companies in Silicon Valley. But, you know, they're digging up the land and, you know, destroying things they shouldn't. And they still continue to do that today. And I think talking with Christian there, it was really obvious that he was not shying away from that stuff. And he was using sort of the idea of cyberpunk very effectively, like using that genre as a, you know, critique of something really well. So I'm excited to play that. I haven't had a chance just because I've been making my own game, and
yeah.
So I think that's better said, sometimes it's easier said than done. So yeah.
There's a game called We Are the Caretakers. It's a Afrofuturist, like sustainable kind of RPG. I've been watching it for a while. I'm really excited by this trend of like culture being cyberpunked and like sort of adapted into sci-fi. I think it's a really interesting opportunity and it's really cool, and it gets me kind of really interested and excited by the sorts of things that are happening. And I think we can pay a lot of credit to sort of the success of the Black Panther film for that. But I think that giving a platform to creators to really show, like, okay, you think of our culture as this like archaic, like barbaric, simplistic, like here's what it happens if it's allowed to evolve and expand and become digital in a way that you never gave it a chance. It's really exciting to me because it's like implicitly anti-colonial, but in a really like empowered and like it doesn't need to talk back to imperialism. It can just be like, fuck you, I don't even want to reference you, we're moving on to something different. And I think that's really good because we haven't really had a chance to do that. You know, like a lot of our existence is just fighting to exist and fighting to prove that we're relevant or valid or whatever. And the ability to say, okay, instead of engaging in this fight, I want to move beyond it and look at what's a more utopic future, or what's a future in which our culture is just allowed to be without being kind of relative to something else, is so cool. Like everyone who's doing stuff like that is just incredible to me, because it's taken me them doing it to even occur that that's a possibility, that we don't have to necessarily engage in this fight that the other side isn't really interested in giving up. So let's move past it.
Definitely. I'm gonna out myself here pretty much, and like I don't actually know like of any projects that like are like this, and I think that kind of,
you are working on a few though.
Well,
from my own, you're working on all of them.
They were specifically excluded, so I couldn't even obviously speak to those. But yeah, I think that speaks for something in itself, is that these projects need to be like just like broadcasted louder, like all the people who are excited by it like retweet, share it, like talk about it all the time, so it can reach to more people and get around these really awesome projects. But yeah, I've been like writing down like the ones you guys are talking about. I can keep an eye on it. And yeah, and like I said, in that Discord, like seeing people's like little snippets of their projects that they're working on is really awesome. So just seeing those like smaller personal projects that just get into like directly into somebody's story, as opposed to like a big larger company who's trying to portray something else. That more intimate personal stuff, I think, is really special. I like to see that too. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. Is that, I think it's Nataniki, that's my te reo pronunciation, mentioned Hill Agency, which I was gonna shout out to, by Megan Byrne, who is a Native American developer, also in the Discord. The Discord is only for Indigenous game developers, so if there's anyone watching who's Indigenous and wants to join, please do so, because I feel like when I met with some Indigenous game developers, there was like a meetup at GDC in San Francisco years ago, back when there used to be conferences in person, and
before the dark times.
When we used to go on planes, and just meeting them and knowing about like the games they were making, I was like, oh my god, like this is so cool. Like it just opened up so many doors for me, and I'm constantly inspired by all of the stuff that everyone's doing around the world. Another one was Button City, which was just like a real cute game. I think it's going to be, or it wasn't the last Wholesome Direct, might be in the next one, but just like the breadth and the nuance of the stories that we can tell is just awesome. Like I really love that corridor around the cyberpunk, kind of like redefining it as Indigenous people, I guess. You know, it's not like it's Blade Runner, it's like, no, it's just us like existing and vibing and having a meantime like in the future, you know. Sweet. We kind of touched on this. Oh, sorry, Tali, did you?
I was just going to raise a thing. I think one thing that we often don't give enough credit for is that Indigenous people have really defined the video game space as a whole.
Yeah.
And one of the things I would point to that I think no one can deny as a fact is John Romero's contribution to video games. And if you really look at the sort of nature of a lot of the stuff he did, it is Indigenous ways of doing. And to say that is things like, you know, game engines, where it's this idea that you're giving something to people to create things with, and it's this reciprocity and, you know, this sharing process. You know, I think, you know, when people have that capitalist mindset, it's about pay and money and all
Yeah.
that. Whereas when, like I had a chance to yarn with him a couple of months ago, and he was talking about how id was one of the first groups to make these game engines, and the guy behind that they sort of left that with, he went to Unreal, and that's where Unreal Engine came from, right? And all this stuff that you can see with someone like him, or all these other sort of older industry Indigenous people, I think about the stuff that they contributed and how it's some of the really influential stuff that's in games at the moment that is often not sort of ascribed as this sort of thing that Indigenous people made. But, the reality is, I think it's, our sort of ways that end up sort of creating things like that. And that's why I think they're really important to have in a space like this. And not just as sort of a consultancy space, but in a leading space where people can listen and do from what is sort of like told from that sort of ontological perspective.
Yeah, totally. It's awesome. Someone else in the comments also just said, yes, Afrofuturism and Indigenous sci-fi. So here for it. Same. We kind of touched on this a bit earlier, but I personally haven't done consultation for projects before because I feel I don't have enough knowledge around my Te Ao Māori. Like the game that we're working on, Toroa, we have Taikawa, who's like my friend, and but he's our consultant. So I was wondering, what have you guys had experience with consultation on games or other projects before? What sort of stuff did that involve? Maybe we can start with Phoebe with this one.
Sure. Yeah, so my first role when DragonBear approached me, my very first games job was for consultation, and I admittedly had never done that, but I have had a lot of involvement with community and culture my entire life. But like you, Lisa, I felt very underknowledged for this thing. But, I was working with my dad, just talking to him, and he was talking about that support that I have from my elders and community. And, I'm kind of like this middleman where I can help ferry these like ideas and support our elders and telling these stories and provide that information and do that with a game. So yeah, my processes were a bit crazy, but the one thing I wanted to make sure was that the elders were very aware of what content was going into the game and what content would surround that and how it would be presented, and keeping them updated all the time. So if anything changed, I would let them know and we'd talk about it. And, when I initiated these conversations, I have to, kind of think about explaining a game to people who don't play games or know mechanics. So like very basic word and language, like first person RPG, like, or anything, like, it's
totally
got to break it down and try to, even then, like, it's very difficult to find those words in between. So making sure that, just making sure the elders are aware of what content it is and if they have any feedback or what things we should stay away from as well. And I've actually done some other kind of consultation work around as an Indigenous, like just woman myself, from those experiences. So providing feedback for a story and just looking at it. And I found it was difficult because, again, that wasn't the first time I had done that. So I was like, can I, like I'm not an elder, I'm not that old at all, really. So can I really judge this? Yeah, just taking it from my perspectives and what I felt like for me to be an Indigenous woman, and a strong Indigenous woman at that. So two different types of consultation, but
yeah. What about you, Dakoda?
Yeah, most of my consultation work happened kind of in the past few years before I moved to Melbourne, and a lot of it, almost all of it, I think, came from Melbourne. So my consultation work was just connecting people with local community groups to give them access to people who could actually provide that information. There's a lot of the shared kind of, I don't want to say generic, but that's sort of the shared information between different mobs that I can kind of do comfortably, but it's not my place to consult on stuff that really should be about and handled by people from that region. So yeah, since I've moved, there's not been too much opportunity to do so, but in many ways I think that's good, because I think, you know, people are reaching out directly to people who are local to their area. And you know, even now, if someone from Melbourne were to be like, hey, I have consultation work for you, I would be empowered to connect them with someone like Phoebe, who is more local to this region, more likely to be able to provide that information. And I'm very happy to like just be that connecting person. Like, it doesn't it's a service that I'm more than happy to provide for free. But I have done sensitivity reading and some sort of here's some general tips on how to include something in an incidental way without running into any like really common pitfalls or like big no-nos. Because sometimes, you know, people are interested in incorporating something, but they don't have the capacity to give it full kind of attention. They can't go and embed a character as a significant role, but they don't want to ignore it completely and sort of contribute to that erasure. So it's like, here's how you can do something, and it doesn't feel tokenistic, how it, you know, still feels deliberate and empowering. And so those sorts of smaller things kind of do from time to time. And also through Represent Me, which Phoebe has helped with as well. Yeah. We're putting together a series of best practices guides for a whole bunch of stuff. And so I did copy editing for everything, but as part of this, really kind of helping to make sure that the guide we put together on like how to talk about Indigenous Australians in media and also in the workplace, and how we kind of create pathways and processes to treat people well, kind of put forward a lot more of my experience and my my knowledge that I've still been very tentative to. You know, it's hard, you know, when we're part of cultures that have this sort of hierarchy where, you know, the elders are empowered and they make decisions and they're custodians of information. And it's really hard sometimes to navigate our processes and also the expectations of sort of the world around us. And so I get anxious about it a lot, but I think that to do something is better than to do nothing and let these opportunities kind of go and you know, let things be erased or done poorly or whatever. So it's a challenge, and again, you know, we're not perfect at it by any stretch, but I think it's really great that we've had the opportunity to build our skills at doing this and really connect our culture to games in a way that wouldn't have been done otherwise.
Have you ever done any?
Well, I was going to say, so yeah, I haven't done any consultancy because, you know, I'm Māori living in Aussie, and I don't think it's appropriate.
Yeah.
But I guess my thing is that sort of, you know, I have worked with people who were doing consultancy because it was sort of like they said, you know, oh, we need someone who's, you know, knows a little bit about tech stuff. Can you come and sit in the meeting with us, right? And, you know, the thing I kind of think about that was sort of, obviously I can't do the consulting because, you know, I don't know this country, you know, same way my mates do. But it's this kind of thing where I was able to sort of give them some advice because one of the people across from the table was hilariously overquoting their work thing that was like someone who knows like tech like me. They were talking about needing, you know, $18,000 of this very limited budget to do something that honestly would only take you about an afternoon to do. And, you know, I was able to at least talk with, you know, the mob there and say, this guy's trying to take you for a ride. You know, are you aware of that? And then I explained it to him. And, you know, they're able to sort of come back to the negotiation table around that and, you know, negotiate a little bit more from a position of power. Because, like, I guess the thing I kind of think about is that, especially when it comes to, like, things like that where there's money involved, a lot of the times mob aren't properly compensated. And, like, the thing I just kind of think is, you know, someone like me where I'm not, you know, obviously able to give any advice around that stuff, but I am able to sort of, you know, support in other ways. And I think, I guess my thinking around that is just sort of like, when it comes to consultancy, like I totally agree with what you're saying there, Dakoda, about, you know, handing it off to Phoebe when it comes to stuff down there, because it's, you know, way more appropriate to do. And I think, you know, oftentimes there's it's like, that's one of the hardest barriers to get over to sort of non-Indigenous people, is this whole like, no, I can't speak for all Maori, or I can't speak for, you know, Indigenous people in Australia. I am Indigenous in Australia, but I'm not Indigenous to Australia, right? And it's this sort of thing where I think, like I think this is sort of going back to the yarn earlier, but it's like, there's this lack of education around this stuff, which I think needs to sort of be introduced, and maybe it's introduced slowly, but I think as that starts to happen, I think we'll see a lot of positive things come through.
Yeah, I just want to add to that quickly. I think the both of you have really touched on some really awesome things, you know, that, like you said, Ty, mob need to be properly compensated. And Dakoda, you talked about, you know, those kind of cultural hierarchies that are so extremely different from like non-Indigenous people. You know, we tend to really hold our elders in high regard. And if there are those social implications for people who don't follow these hierarchies, and I 100% share those anxieties with you. And I'm so glad I'm not the only one. Yeah. But there is a lot of anxiety around, you know, following mob processes and meeting these, you know, due dates and work timelines. They just won't work. You know, I think a lot of people don't understand that there's a lot of people trying to reach out to elders because they are so held in high regard and they are those knowledge custodians, but there's very few of them and they have so many jobs. So just getting in touch with them is extremely difficult. So if you you know, if you're in the audience and you are working with consultants or wanting to work with consultants and include Indigenous content, I really want to stress to look after your consultants. You know, they're jumping through multiple social hoops and, you know, following these cultural practices to make sure that what you want can happen, but in a way that doesn't put anyone's cultural safety at jeopardy. And, you know, be very, very forgiving of timelines and waiting times. You know, you might hear back from an elder within a couple of hours, and it might be months. You know, we talk about blackfella time for a reason.
Oh,
like
yeah.
There's these, like it's a thing. But yeah, that's something that I really wanted to stress, was look after your consultants, because there's a lot more behind the scenes work than just going to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
Deadlines are dictated by the land, not by people. Like our cultural experience is about the natural world, not like someone needs something by X date, so get it done. Like it's, you know, it's very strange to a lot of people, and you know, it perpetuates those stereotypes of Black folks being lazy. And I'm like no, they are operating in a different world, a different set of priorities. You got to be flexible. You got to be understanding of those things. It's not that they don't care about your stuff, but there's a rhythm and flow that is different from the one that you're on, and you have to get with it or be patient. Like, those are your choices.
Yeah, totally agree. And it's like, it's a privilege to be able to work with them first and foremost. So yeah, I totally agree. Also, that kind of reminded me of the stuff we were talking about a little bit earlier as well, around the like types of stories. And there are things that developers might approach you know, Indigenous people with and be like, oh, I know you have this really cool story around this thing, and we want to make a game out of it. And then just be like, no, like that's not right, that's not like Tika, that's not, we just can't. And people really struggle with that, because they think that they're doing a good thing by being like, you should share this with everyone. And it's like, no, we should just make stuff that we want to make for us and by us. I think that's something that I've found a lot recently with people, at least being wanting to take the right steps of putting Indigenous stories, Indigenous characters, all of that stuff into the games, but it just comes from a place of them wanting to do it, but not understanding why they actually want to do it. Did anyone else want to just add to that at all, just because it's a really important thing before I move on?
I think also, like, yeah, really focusing on why you want to do it. You know, what is your reason for sharing these Indigenous stories if you're not Indigenous? You know, what is this contributing to, I think is a question that anyone who's wanted to include Indigenous culture anyway needs to have a very good answer for.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, always thinking about the why.
Yeah.
It's like I remember doing we did this sort of we did this thing once. There was a thing for a while at universities. You probably have heard of this one, Dakoda ClickView, for a little while, and basically we got contacted at one point when I was working at the uni about doing some, content for ClickView, and it was this kind of thing where the two people who were going to do the sort of talking were one of my mates, Dinawan, and the other one, Janine, and they were going to sort of explain this stuff, and basically they were doing sort of a Q&A section sort of for students around sort of like the history of Australia, right? And then sort of the white history of Australia came up, and what you need to be aware of is these are two university academics, right? One, with a sort of Western academic sort of university, and the other one sort of like a Black university academic background, and the idea that he's a cultural custodian, right? And the one with the Western background there explained something that was the truth of what happened on things in the past, and this sort of interview person sort of challenged her on it and said, "Oh no, it's not what I've got written in my notes. This is someone who studied this stuff extensively," and it was this very like facepalm moment for all us. We all kind of looked at each other and did that thing where we can all tell each other what's going on, and we had to sort of go, no, that's not what happened there. And it's this sort of thing where I feel sometimes with this stuff there's just that there's that, I guess, ongoing, I think, kind of disrespect or whatever, that we don't actually know what we're talking about, when a lot of times we know exactly what we're talking about because we live it every day.
Totally, 100%.
A little bit of like humility and self-awareness to think that it could actually be you that's incorrect, not making the assumption that like, nah, definitely them. Like, come on.
Must be like that pretty common in universities though, right?
Oh, yeah, look, it's written in a book,
It means it's true.
Yeah.
I just noticed some other games in the chat as well. B-Sides by Elijah Forbes. I haven't heard that. Definitely check that out. And then actually Chad brought up Love Punks, which was Australian-made Indigenous game that I remember coming across when I was studying at uni. It was like one of the biggest inspirations for me to do my thesis. So that's just beautiful. That's so, love that. Cool. So I feel like I know a lot of Indigenous people working in games, but statistically that is not correct. Why do you think, I used to pose this question and ask, why do you think there aren't that many Indigenous people in games, and what can we do to make it better? But I think we're doing everything we can. So what do you all think that allies, non-Indigenous people can do to make this industry feel more welcoming and safe for Indigenous folks? Starting with Dakoda shaking his head.
Yeah, it's like, because I feel like a lot of the things that we can do or that people can do, it's not even necessarily about making the spaces more inviting for Indigenous folks. It's making it for people who aren't the default. Like there's so much preventing so many different kinds of people from getting into game spaces that it's, if you are someone who wants to change that culture, then provide opportunities, take a chance on someone who doesn't fit that norm. Like, even if it's only one person, maybe you empower them, skill them up, and allow them to then provide more pathways for their peers, their colleagues, their culture and community. It's really about slowly breaking down those barriers and making it, like taking a stand against the bullshit. Like, don't let little jokes go. Like, no, this is not a place where you can let your team members be harassed by stereotypes, or let characters in your games be defined by stereotypes. Like, stamp that shit out straight away and be like, no, like, I get that you mean it in jest, whatever, let's not do that, let's be better. And it's a tough problem, and when I try and think about it, it stresses me out, because I often feel like so many people have been fighting so hard for so long, and the change is so microscopic that is it ever going to be okay? But we can give up, or we can keep doing what we're doing, and I think that trying is better than not. And so it's really about encouraging people, and there are opportunities, like get a consultant. They might never have any experience in games, they might be culturally literate, maybe they find that they're actually really interested in, and maybe they have arts background or music background that can then be adapted, and suddenly you've got someone working in the games industry that never would have considered it before, and never would have had the pathways to do so before. And little by little, we bring in more people, and not only is that good for culture and community, that's great for skills. Like, the games industry thrives on people from outside of games bringing stuff in. There's no way for an insular community in games to innovate and do new interesting things. It takes outside ideas. I encourage all of my students, study something fucking weird. Don't just do games classes. Bring something interesting.
Yes.
If all you know is how to make games, all you can do is make games about how to make games. So learn other stuff. And that's, I think, like, by bringing more people in whatever capacity we can, we allow that culture, the average personality and interest level to shift, and again, it's going to take fucking forever, but we do the best that we can, because that's all we can do.
Maybe I'll let you go.
Okay. Are you sure?
It gets me fired up.
Mic drop.
Yeah, Dakoda's definitely onto it. It's just that giving people a chance, and like taking time to upskill these people, I think is really important. I think games specifically, when I was out of uni and looking for jobs, all of the jobs that I were looking for were like 5 years game experience, 20 ship titles. It's like for anybody, how to get into this industry, how do you anymore? It's almost unachievable, and there was very little, like beginner roles available at all for people trying to learn, unless it's a internship. And even the big companies who we'd hope could give us all these internship opportunities, like, have 2 spaces. Like, I missed out on an internship with a very big company, a dream company, by the way. How dare they not accept me? And the people who they got were fabulous game designers, but you need to look at people so you can upskill them. And like Dakoda said, the wider the audience in the games community and the people making games, the more interesting stories we get to experience. And I think as well, just for allies specifically, like, even if you're not working in games and you just love games, just like I said, just really like boombox that stuff, like really amplify all those smaller indie games and the people who are doing amazing work, like talk about it all the time, share it all the time, and get it to a large audience as well.
I would say 2 things. One is, we're going to get to a point in games probably in the next 10 years where you don't need to learn how to program. So, if you do have 10 years of experience programming, and we get to the point where it can do it all visually, I think it's like what Dakoda said, there's that other thing that you must know how to do that will inform it. And I feel like, one thing I'm sort of reminded of is, Lucas Pope, who made, 2 of sort of these great indie games. Before he worked there, he worked at Naughty Dog, making tools for people who didn't know how to code to be able to design in those engines, And it wasn't about knowing the bits and bytes and all that technical side. It was about the knowing and the artistic intent of it. And so I feel like, with Indigenous people, we have a lot to offer there. And there's this whole thing where in this games space, there are more jobs than just the technical ones. You know, being able to tell a story well is something I think that the games industry as a larger whole still hasn't quite gotten its hands on, right? We still get these stories that are dog shit, right? The second thing I would say is that if you are sort of doing something around sort of, you're thinking about funding an indie project with Indigenous people on it, for God's sake, please do not put these strings on it around it where it has to be about drugs or suicide, okay? We often see that with this sort of funding and stuff like that, where there's this kind of thing where they say it's Indigenous funding, and then it's Indigenous funding, and then it's got all these different criteria that we don't, you know, we can talk about them, but we'd rather talk about all the other stuff, right, over here. You know, I think it's this whole thing where, you know, I had a really great yarn with Taikawa when we met up in Wellington, right? And it was this whole thing around, wouldn't it be great if there was an Indigenous publisher out there who was willing to make these games and say, you guys have your own agency, here's a block of money, go do it, right? And I feel that, you know, it's this idea that maybe that'll, you know, stew up over the next 10 years or something like that, and we'll have something like that. But I feel that one of the biggest hurdles there is that there's still this, you know, parental control or this thing where you often see that they still want to sort of have it as a little pet thing, and they want to be the ones controlling it rather than just letting us do our own thing. And I feel one of the biggest things you can do if you're ever in that position is to say, here is a bucket of money, go use it the same way anyone else would if we were giving this bucket of money, not all this other extra bullshit on top.
100%. There is people wanting to help us and do these things, but you know, you don't have to be like parenting us and keeping an eye on our project. Like, if you're already willing to invest this money, give us the money and let us run with it if you believe in it, and let us have this free reign. 100% I agree with that.
I mean, I would just say that I've seen so many indie games where they have gotten this unconditional funding and they've crashed and burned. Why not let us do that as well, right?
Let us fail.
Let us fail with the money, right? Rather than giving us all this money that has a million strings attached and you can't move, and then you crash and burn or something, you know? Sorry, go to
Yeah, what's empowering about that? Like why attach little asterisks to everything to be like, oh, look, we're doing such a nice thing and providing this pool of money that is functionally purposeless. Like, you are making it a barrier so that you can say, I'm doing a nice thing without having to commit to it. Like, yeah, just take the chance. Like, fucking, why not? I'm sure enough money has been like ripped from the ground here that you can afford to lose a bit.
Definitely.
Yeah. Exactly. That as well, you know, like the Australian government recently announced these giant fucking grants. I should stop swearing. I think this is a family thing.
Yeah,
but,
sorry, everybody.
The Aussie government recently announced all these grants, and I haven't read through it quite enough, but, you know, I hope there is a section in that saying, you know, here you go, you guys can do it now, and we're not going to put all this stuff on it, because, you know, like from what I sort of read, I think you had to sort of reach certain goals or something that for a lot of people is sort of out of their hands, you know.
And the metrics are so different. Like what counts as a success in their eyes is not
Cash,
what would be considered a success culturally. Like you have to, like, the people making these decisions need their own consultants, their own people on board to explain, like, if you want these sorts of outcomes, you're not going to get them. Like, don't force us to conform to what you want.
Yeah, totally agree. Just conscious of time. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat now, and then we can answer them. That actually just made me curious about the funding opportunities for Indigenous people in Australia, because in New Zealand for games there's like one thing, but it's through like the Film Commission, and it's like very specific, like you said. I haven't ever applied for it or anything like that. And then we have like, I think for Code, which is the Dunedin-based one, there's going to be funding specifically for Indigenous games. But is there anything like that at the moment in Australia?
I'm not sure about Indigenous specific stuff. Most of our stuff is run through the film, like the state film bodies as well. I applied once for funding through Screen Queensland, just in the general pool. I don't know if there was a specific one. And I know Film Vic is much better at doing game stuff than like anyone else in the country. But
they're killing it.
Yeah, it's not super well advertised if it is there. But I guess, worth checking and seeing what sort of strings are attached. And
if there's any millionaires watching, you should give us money.
I mean, I'd say, like, you know, one of the things I'm thinking with Umurangi is, like, it's done pretty good so far. And the idea is, if it does, you know, gangbusters, putting aside a bit of that pool of money to do that publishing stuff in the future. But I guess the thing I kind of think about is, like, Australia's games industry is barely existent outside of, like, Victoria, really. You know, I'm near Byron Bay at the moment, and I'll tell the person I'm get my coffee off in the morning, I'll go, what do you do? I make games. What? You know, it's this sort of thing where people go, it doesn't exist, right? But, you know, I think about just the potential of this space where it's so sort of like at the bottom floor at the moment, where it hasn't grown into sort of the, you know, giant ultra capitalist nightmare in other places, right? That I feel if, you know, we as Indigenous people can get in on the ground floor and grow it the right way, it could actually be this sort of thing where that then informs what Australia's games industry is, because it's been grown the right way. It hasn't been grown with this idea of, you know, monies and mergers and stuff. It's been grown with this idea of, like, a different kind of value. You know, like, one of the things this fellow, Rod Williams, he's Bunjong in, what's that, Coffs Harbour mob again? Anyway, he used to say to me this idea that, you know, our families have tangible and intangible assets. You know, we have tangible things like land and things like that, but then we have the intangible things, which is stuff like stories and all this other stuff, right? And there's a shitload of value to those that we've got to protect. And I feel like with games, it could be this kind of thing where, you know, obviously you're not giving it to the world or whatever, but if you're willing to share and do it the right way, it can be this kind of thing where, you know, communities can grow themselves from it. I feel, you know, that would be probably like, in my eyes, it's the best way to grow this Australian game scene, because there aren't all these rules in place yet. So if we can sort of do that, that would be good, you know?
Yeah, I want to see way more collaboration between people, you know, sharing and building each other up, not kind of falling into that trap of thinking that we're all competitors, even if we're working on things that are similar, you know. Like, I get that the games industry is like that, but we don't need it to be like, and we don't need to even try to compete sort of on that scale. You know, there are a couple of big breakout games that have done really well, but we don't need to shoot for that. We can make cool stuff and it will sell and it will do well, but we can focus on our communities, broader communities, and making our spaces a pleasant place to be.
Now we should turn the gaze inwards, and we'll ask Lisa a bunch of questions.
Oh, I gotta go now.
Oh, time's up, quick.
I did have one thing I just thought of as well when we were talking about the, because I just saw all these awesome comments of people being like, yeah, pay people, give people a chance, learn other stuff. And like, when I think about game design, and there are companies looking for game designers with like 10 plus years experience, but I'm like, what is that games design? Because design is something that just is ever changing, and like games have definitely not reached, you know, the peak of the user experience. So
I have 3 years of working with the Kinect. It's so relevant now.
Yeah, exactly right. It's like, yeah, I spent 10 years on the iToy, but like, yeah, that's just something that fascinates me personally.
Yeah. And it's approaching one singular kind of like experience or education pathway.
Yeah.
Like, there's not like, particularly when you think about the barriers that prevent, you know, like, you might want someone that's got 10 plus years of experience. Well, first of all, they probably needed a degree. And first of all, they needed to have been able to get one. Like all the barriers that prevent that, like if you want to see, you know, if you want to change, you've got to be able to take a risk on people who don't fit that carbon copy kind of list of qualifications. You know, have a look at, I've seen loads of people coming out of like the performative arts, like interactive theater spaces that have so much knowledge that's applicable, because play is not just one thing.
Yeah.
Play is much more widespread and transferable, and so looking at, you know, people who are just coming through games programs or you know, just have been working in the industry for a long time doesn't mean that they're any better, any more qualified. Even we just need to change what our metrics are, what our scales are.
Totally. I just noticed Silver's in the chat. We shouted out a few. Also, Simon, that's a really great question. What kind of games do you all want to make? I want to start with Phoebe.
I mean, personally, I'm obsessed with like open world, like Skyrim style games. So like anything that's like adventure, fantasy, like I'm all over. But I do really love those like personal, like kind of stories. I think I'm playing Wild at Heart at the moment, actually, for some like research. And I had just seen the trailer briefly, and it was very cute looking. And then the story kind of hit me very personally at the beginning. I was like, I'm not ready, but I'm ready for the game. But like in terms of like Indigenous like content in games and what, you know, culture looks like in games, I wanna see more of that futurism stuff. You know, a lot of focus on Indigenous culture is like 50,000 years ago when we had nothing, no technology, no nothing. We were all living in the bush. Like I want to like what does culture look like in the future? You know, culture. I think personally, there's a lot of like Indigenous culture that I feel like is very stuck in that old way, and because we've experienced a lot of loss of that culture and a lot of destruction of that culture, those peoples and those generations that experience that are very conscious of preserving it, which I completely understand. But I do, you know, you look at other cultures around the world and they do. Every culture evolves and changes and technology changes, and what does our culture look like in the future? Like, you know, this Black Panther, like super futuristic, like what does that look like? And I think I'm excited to see more people build on that and kind of look into that a bit more for sure.
Dakoda, or do you want me to say it?
Yeah, I'm still at the stage now where a lot of the stuff that I want to make is very self-serving and trying to, you know, continue down that pathway of really looking inward and reflecting and trying to piece together like who I am and how I feel about that. But I really I'm obviously a huge fan of the forward-looking stuff as well, but a part of me really wants to explore the now and not think about, you know, there's this idea that we are in this transitional period, and I feel that, but I also think that maybe that's a little too harsh. Maybe that's you know, we're mourning what was and trying to get to what is to come, but we're here now, we exist, this is our culture, this is our moment. What does it look like to be a Black fella in 2021? What is it, you know, what are the things that matter? What's the manifestation of culture? And what are ways in which that can be playful? You know, there's still a lot of quite personal kind of reflections and stuff that I want to bring forward that are they don't work if you transpose them to the past or the future. They are very specific to my experience now, you know, in today. And I want to, when I have the emotional strength to do so, I want to tackle that. Like, you know, there's even insofar as like reflecting on how do we maintain our connection to community and land when we're in a pandemic, and what does it mean to be facing things that we're not supposed to be facing? Like, you know, the like I drove to Melbourne when I moved, and we drove through the bushfires of 2019, those fires aren't supposed to happen when the land is looked after. You know, being a blackfellow in Australia means being on land that is not respected the way that it's supposed to be, which manifests in all sorts of ways. It's an interesting, challenging, confronting kind of experience. And as much as I don't want to spend all my time kind of fighting against stuff, I also think that I need to, for my own benefit, to explore the kind of trauma that exists today that's, you know, carried forward from generations, this stuff that we've inherited and we have to do something with.
Great answer.
Well, I guess I'll probably keep doing what I'm doing, which is sort of actually what you're just saying, Dakoda, which is like, you know, Umurangi Generation was about looking at what's going on now, but through the lens of something that's a little bit, you know, more, you know, fantastical, I guess. But, you know, one thing I think about with Umurangi was like, and Lisa, you can back me up on this, was doing stuff very deliberate in the game. So there's a point to it all. You know, one of the ideas is, one of the levels is your sort of typical cyberpunk slum that you often see in movies and stuff, where it's anyone could be there and, oh, look at how bad it would be. But it's about flipping that and saying, this is actually where community is at the moment. And community is able to survive in this space. And if you look really closely in that space, you can see that the community's told the cops to fuck off and that they'll police themselves because the cops aren't doing the right thing. And one of the other things that's really deliberate about that level is that there are no blue bottles in that level.
Yeah.
This might sound a little bit weird, but in the game, there's a thing called blue bottles, and they're the game's hazard. And very deliberately on that level, there's none of them there because it's our communities who've always known how to manage this stuff and clean it up. Whereas when you go to the, you know, more, you know, parkier places, it's a mess, right? And it's this kind of thing where I do absolutely agree with you about that, where, you know, it is our families who are the ones who have always done this stuff the right way. You know, these bushfires could have been avoidable if country was maintained, you know what I mean? And, you know, custodians of land were listened to, but we all know they weren't. You know, like the thing I kind of remember is there was a group called the Fire Sticks Initiative, and they would sort of go down the coast doing burn-offs the right way, because it was the kind of thing where country would tell you when's the best time to do a burn-off. And, you know, it's this kind of thing where certain people just could not see that past their own colonial, you know, blinders, where they saw it as a, you know, the magical shaman thing, rather than the fact that it's just practical knowledge that, you know, has been passed down. So my thinking is that going forward into games, I want to be this sort of thing where there's an opportunity to push a little bit, push the games industry forward by making these games that are way beyond the conversation that's happening now, and pulling that to this thing where you're commanding people's attention into saying, actually, this is what's going on. You know, I always sort of plan a couple of things ahead, and I've got a couple of games planned in the future. But one of them is about looking at sort of this idea of, you know, that generational colonization, that sort of thing where there are people who have inherited all these issues, and, you know, it's about them starting to sort of unpack that from their own sort of contemporary space, you know. And there's this whole thing where people do talk about the past a lot, but it's about what's going on now. And I think, you know, there's a lot of really good stuff, I think, that, you know, for me personally, I can do in this space. And I think, you know, not going there or sort of doing the same thing that we've always sort of been forced to do, which is to sort of sit in the corner and shut the fuck up, right? I think with this, it's the space where you can do this kind of radical thing, and you can really start to push. And you know, you might get some cop back, but like you said earlier, those are the kind of people we don't actually have to listen to. You know, I'm thinking of a recent Steam review of the game, and it was like, oh, I love the game, it was so good. And it was a negative review, right? And it was this thing where the person had like 13 hours on the game. And then they said, oh, but, you know, I just didn't really want the political stuff in there. You know, I'm just trying to have a nice photography game, right? But it's like too fucking bad, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like go play something else then, because I think the idea is that if you want this stuff that I'm going to make, it's going to be the stuff where you have to take, you have to eat your veggies as well. You got to consume the parts of it that I'm trying to talk to you about around it. So, I think it's just one of those things where, I feel that the space has this opportunity to really sort of open up and become a really interesting space. And this is what I mean about if we can grow it right here in Australia, it could be this kind of thing where, as someone who grew up in the 2000s, we all know about Australian alternative metal, and we all know that was one of the most, everyone went, oh my God, look at what they're doing in Australia, right? And it's the sort of thing where I think we can do the same thing with games, just by being and doing the right thing. Yeah.
Awesome. We just have 5 minutes left, so I want to end on this question from Chad, which I think is really good. If existing colonial structures like funding bodies and art institutions are too restrictive, exploitative, or oppressive for mob or POC, what do you think the alternative is? Do we create our own structures? And if so, how do we navigate that weird kind of tension with that?
Yeah, if one of us can just make it huge and then start funding everyone else.
That's what I think.
Just one of us.
Yeah.
Someone needs to become a millionaire and start.
Whoever's the most competent navigating these pre-existing structures, go huge.
Uncle John Romero.
Yeah. But yeah, it is tough.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry it on.
I was going to say, if those structures are like that, we should burn them down.
Yeah.
They're not working for anyone, are they?
Yeah.
So, that's I've been talking to Yaron a lot. So, yeah, Lisa.
Oh, kia ora. She's in the chat.
Yeah, look, I spent this whole semester apologizing for being a radical leftist in my classes, but then I reached that tipping point. No, you burn it all down. It's all bad. Let's start again. The country benefits from that on a natural physical level. Maybe society can do the same.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the systems and pathways need to be established, understanding the kinds of people who will be navigating them, and then not. There's an expectation that a very specific kind of person will be applying for funding, getting funding, and making use of it in specific ways, and that doesn't reflect the kinds of people that are coming from cultural identities here and around the world. It's I don't think we can just kind of slap down here's the alternative. I think it needs to be a lot more grassroots everywhere, but we can still support each other and do what we can to sort of shift things in those directions until such a time as it all burns down or we build something different, regardless. So it's
something I think that's really interesting about that is one of the things we saw after those fires burnt down most of Australia was the growth that came back afterwards, and it was beautiful.
Yeah.
It's all a metaphor.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Literal.
Bad literary intelligence going on if people can't see the metaphor and understand that.
Totally. We actually had time for the last question, which is cool because it's another good one. Does making a text for a non-Indigenous audience force certain compromises in your work? Are issues like legibility important?
It doesn't have to be.
Mm.
You choose your audience, and so you can choose to make your work as arcane and incomprehensible as you want. My struggle is always about accessibility stuff and trying to navigate that, because that's if something doesn't make sense to someone, that's kind of unfortunate, but whatever. But if someone can't access it at all, that's really rough. And so that's the only place where I feel like I would be tempted to compromise my work in order to make it accessible. But I don't really feel the need to make myself palatable, like particularly when a lot of the stuff that I've made is self-serving. Like I make it for a purpose for myself, and hope that it has sort of a broader appeal. If it doesn't, then it doesn't. I still get what I need out of it. But if I were to sort of shoot for kind of a broad audience cultural work, I still think that my key audience is making something that my mob would care about. And so a non-Indigenous audience can absolutely appreciate it if they can kind of bring the skills and knowledge and competency to the table. But if they can't, that sucks. But I mean, I don't need those sales to pay my bills. Like that's not, you know, if I was a full-time game dev, then maybe that would be a concern of mine, but it's not.
Yeah, I agree with Dakoda. I feel like if, you know, it's your work, you can make what you want. If that doesn't agree with everyone, 100% go for it. I don't think you should try to, you know, change your work if it's not something that you want to make. But I also think it depends on, you know, the spaces that you're working in. You know, if you're a completely sole game designer working on your own game on your own, you know, you have a lot more control, and you know exactly who you want your audience to be and what purpose it wants to serve. But if you're coming into another company and they want you to help with this kind of stuff, it can be quite difficult to try to navigate with that second party, you know, trying to meet with what exactly their game is and what it wants, and maybe trying to insert your own kind of views and cultural stuff into it. I think can be a difficult or complicated kind of area to navigate as well. But 100% agree. Make what you want, and you pick your audiences for sure.
I guess I'm going to just try and do this quick because I realize I've been talking the most. I'll just say, like with Umurangi, the idea was that because you're an active participant in the game, you know, you're actually in there playing it, you know, and the person who's holding the camera, you can feel the connections of being you rather than like a predefined character. The idea with that was about getting people to walk, you know, through the game and see it from a different perspective. You know, you're not seeing it from the, you know, heroic cyberpunk detective. You're seeing it as a Māori teenager in this, you know, neoliberal hellscape that, you know, has all these sort of connections to sort of the ongoing effects of colonization and stuff. And so I think the reason for doing that was that by the time they get to the end of the DLC in the game, they can see the violence of the state, their own personal experience with the game. And that's that idea of showing that, like, when they get to that moment, they see that, oh, I get it now. I've been through the whole game and I see how this thing kind of works. And now I can see that this, you know, UN in this game, UN, right? That they're doing, you know, there's the rule breaking, you know, the same rule breaking that we've seen time and time again. And I think it's just that whole thing where, you know, if, say, non-Indigenous people play through that and they start to see or experience something that, you know, is an ongoing reality of this stuff, you know, they can start to not sit on the fence all the time around this stuff, you know, not being like, oh, I don't know about Gaza or Palestine, you know, or, oh, do we really need a treaty in Australia? I'm not sure. It seems like they're just copying New Zealand, right? Or some shit like that. They can start to see, actually, this is not, you know, they're no longer passive around it. Yeah.
Yeah, I always, when I think about that question too, like, lived my whole life, you know, watching Eurocentric, Western, like heavily dominated films, TV, video games, everything. So like, if I can do that, then if Pākehā can play a Māori video game. Also, like, yeah, like if you're not exposing yourself to like new kinds of stories and perspectives, then that just sounds boring. So yeah, just I agree with what everyone said. Just make what you want for the people that you want, and don't let anyone tell you any different. I think that's a great point to end on.
That's good.
yeah, thank you all so much. This has been great. I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. I also want to thank everyone who's been in the chat supporting us and asking questions. It's been awesome to see so many of you. And thank you to Chad as well for hosting us, and looking forward to all of the other talks at Freeplay. It's always my favorite time of the year.
Thanks, Lisa.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening.